Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Heebie Jeebies TV. So, I'm actually pretty excited about this episode because it's about, well, of course it's a true case, but my sister and I, we watched a documentary on it first with a very famous or well-known paranormal investigator called Zak Bagans. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. But anyways, so at the beginning of this movie or documentary, there's actually a warning saying that watch this movie at your own risk because there's essentially a curse placed on the movie due to the powerful forces behind the entire story and documentary. So when we started watching this, we were like, okay, a little weird, but we were still a little skeptical about it because at the end of the day, it's just a movie, right? But as we were watching it, we started to get scared, and we actually had to stop watching it about halfway, and we ended up continuing it about a week later. But after we stopped it, we decided to start diving into some experiences that other people might have had after watching this movie. And to be honest, we were glad that we stopped watching it when we did, because some other people who kept watching through the whole thing, they started to have really weird experiences afterwards and some pretty terrifying things happening to them, from some feeling upset stomach and nausea, having random like spells of diarrhea, I don't know, to having paranormal experiences inside their home, like having lights flickering, hearing noises, having someone knock on their door when no one's there, some really bizarre things. Okay, so what is this documentary cursed movie about? Essentially, it starts off with the Ammons family. So the Ammons family, they live in Gary, Indiana, and they lived in a small home in 2011. And this was a regular family, nothing out of the norm in terms of paranormal experiences really happened to them. But the second that they moved into this house, though, things literally just exploded. So with this, obviously, people in the neighborhood started to find out about it. Eventually, the media found out about it, and that's how paranormal investigators came to investigate it, essentially. And then it ended up quickly becoming one of the most haunted homes in the entire world. And it's actually claimed to be, if not the most haunted place, because they're saying that 200 demons dwell inside this home. So to begin, in November of 2011, Latoya Ammons moved into this home with her mother, Rosa, and her 3 young children. So again, once they moved in, weird things started happening. So within days of moving in, they ended up having black flies pretty much infesting their porch. Why the porch? I have no idea. So things started to escalate with the flies. Of course, they kept getting rid of them, but that didn't help. They kept coming back and back and back. And with anyone who knows things about paranormal, check mark for demonic activity. So one thing that was really bizarre about this, besides the fact that there's a lot of flies around, this is in Indiana at the end of November. So it's winter, it's cold. Why are there a ton of black flies at the end of November, beginning of December? It's freezing. Soon after the black fly infestation, Rosa actually started to have personal experiences of her own. She started hearing weird noises, and then she ended up actually seeing an apparition of a dark figure in the living room. And once it disappeared, she actually ended up seeing a boot footprint of this apparition that had left behind, and nobody else ever saw it. So obviously it freaked her out. One night, the family was actually mourning the death of a loved one. And, you know, in these times, it's very difficult. People come close together. So one of the kids, they were actually sleeping in the grandmother's room. Rosa and the mother were outside of the bedroom, probably in the living room, the kitchen, another part of the house. And then out of nowhere, they hear the daughter screaming, "Mama, mama," screaming at the top of her lungs. So they go running to the room and they find her levitating. They find her levitating. Well, like, what do you do if you walk into a room, you just see Like, that's crazy. So she was levitating and she was unconscious. Did they not just hear her screaming a few seconds ago? So anyways, they hear her screaming, they come running in, and then they see her levitating, and she's still rising as they're watching her. So they all get down on their knees on the ground, start praying, and eventually she just slowly comes down and then ends up going back onto her bed. And then that was it. She had no recollection of what had happened at all. And after that encounter, the entire family at that point was like, okay, something's going on. There's something evil in this house. This isn't normal. You know, you can play off little things like creaks, noises, maybe even an apparition. You can probably play it off and say, oh, it's just something I saw at the corner of my eye. But no, they saw this right in front of their eyes, her levitating. So that's a no-no. So with this, of course, they thought this is out of their league. They don't know what to do. So they ended up seeking out help. They went to the church. Unfortunately, they had to really, really be persistent with the church for them to accept blessing the house. I don't know what the circumstances behind that were. I'm guessing going by other investigations, the church normally needs a lot of evidence before they can go and do any type of blessing or exorcism or anything like that when it comes to demonic activity. But again, nevertheless, their persistence paid off. The church decided to help them cleanse the house, and they decided that it needed to be blessed with bleach, ammonia, and oil to draw out the evil spirits, and then eventually they need to have crosses drawn all over the doors and windows of the house to pretty much protect it and to bless it. So with this information, LaToya did exactly that. The priests or the pastors didn't actually come into the home themselves, but with this information, LaToya took it upon herself to bless the house, and she did exactly that. And she actually even drenched herself and all of her family members with oil just to protect them and to cleanse them from all of the evil entities. So after LaToya ended up cleansing the home and her family members, she actually ended up meeting with clairvoyants to seek out any other type of information. And one of the clairvoyants ended up coming to her home and actually told her that her house was possessed by 200 spirits or 200 demons. So what do you do with that information? So the clairvoyant essentially told her that she had to move out, and that was that. But that wasn't an option for LaToya and her family at the moment. A lot of people forget that moving consists of a lot of expenses, and some people do not have that luxury, unfortunately. It requires first and last month's rent, moving expenses, helping people getting people to help them move all of their belongings. It's a lot to it. So because of this, LaToya explained to the clairvoyant that this wasn't possible for her. So then the clairvoyant actually suggested that she did another blessing of the home, but she suggested that she were to use sage and sulfur for this reason. So LaToya, again, with this valuable information, did just that. And thankfully, it worked a little bit, so they thought, because the house was quiet and peaceful for about 3 days. Nothing ended up happening. But then, dun dun dun, things just started to escalate much quickly than before after that second blessing that had done in the home. So according to Rosa, LaToya and the 3 children actually started to get possessed by whatever demonic forces, evil entities were inside that home. So according to Rosa, their eyes would start bulging. They would have very evil, dark looks to their faces and eyes. They would smile in very unnatural ways, like almost witchy, evil looking faces. And it almost came to a point when it was consuming their faces, but none of them had any recollection of this happening. The only thing that LaToya could actually say that she remembered about it was that she felt like she wasn't in control of her body, and she felt that she was very lightheaded and very weak and just couldn't remember anything after that. So after this, the initial signs of possession were noted. Things started to further escalate and actually became violent. And this ended up happening to the children mostly, which is actually really sad because they're the most vulnerable in this situation, right? They're very innocent. They don't have that mind power, I guess you can say, to repel the evil forces. It started targeting the youngest son. He was apparently seen talking to himself in the room, and he would actually end up locking himself inside his closet, and he was speaking to another young boy, but nobody else could see who this was. And he would stay in there for hours at a time. Very weird, creepy, right? Next, the brother, he was thrown out of his room, flying, as if someone with a lot of force literally picked him up and threw him across the room. And the force of the throw was so heavy that he ended up hitting his head and getting a head injury that required stitches. And what's even creepier about the little brother is that whenever he would talk to this other little boy that the others couldn't see, apparently he was talking about what it's like to be killed. So I don't know if that spirit is a demonic force or if maybe it's another family that might have lived in there and was killed by someone else. So next, another event happened, but this actually happened to one of the daughters, and she actually reported feeling like she was being choked in the middle of the night, and she could hear voices telling her that she was going to die and how she was going to be killed. So after these dangerous encounters that her kids had with these forces, LaToya actually ended up wanting to seek out medical help, and she ended up going to her family doctor and bringing her kids with her, specifically for her son, because he was the one who was talking to someone that wasn't there, hearing voices and being thrown, etc., etc. So at first, when the doctor heard the story, obviously, like any other person, or maybe he was a skeptic as well, he said, "This is crazy. Like, you might be having something going on mentally wrong up there. We need to assess this further." So he kind of ended up, well, not kind of, he actually did. He ordered a psychiatric evaluation to be done, and he was going through other options that LaToya and the family had in regards to their mental health, because he felt that they were having delusions and experiencing hallucinations and probably having some type of psychosis at the moment. But literally mid-visit, the son started to get possessed. He started to get possessed right there in the clinic in front of the doctor and other medical professionals who were there as well to assess LaToya and the family further. The son, he started to swear at the doctor, and his face obviously became that evil looking face that Rosa, the grandmother, had explained prior. And he started swearing in a completely different voice. And again, multiple people saw this, but given that they are medical professionals, they still try to be biased about the whole situation and look at it in a professional view. So the doctor actually still thought that LaToya was the main source of the issue. They thought that she was the one who, again, was hallucinating and delusional and using her kids as pawns towards her delusional story. So because of this, he thought that the kids might be in danger. And so he ended up assigning a social worker to the case and to her family. So once the caseworker ended up getting assigned to the family, they wanted to get these psychological examinations done very quickly. And they actually did them there in the hospital the same day. So after the examinations took place, they found that LaToya and her family were of sound, clear mind. They didn't find that they were experiencing any type of delusions at all. And they ended up clearing the kids of any potential harm or neglect by the mother, as they were suspecting. So now that that's out of hand, they wanted to discuss further things just to see what else was happening, like what's the real issue going on here. While they were having this conversation with the social worker, again, the youngest son started to get possessed, and he legit started to growl at the social worker. I can't do a growl, but he was growling at her, and he got so angry that he actually ended up attacking his older brother in the same room in front of the social worker, and I believe that there were other medical professionals there as well. And they could not get him off of his older brother. They literally had to yank them apart. It wasn't just one or two people, it was several people that had to hold both of them back and separate them. And while all of this was happening, the younger brother's eyes were like rolled to the back of his head. I know people have the ability to do this, but to keep that going while all this is happening, that's just not human. So after this encounter, obviously they wanted to keep investigating. So they ended up separating the two boys and they ended up interviewing them separately, but with their grandmother present to keep LaToya out of the situation, since they thought that, maybe she might have been instigating things. But anyways, again, while the youngest was being interviewed, he started growling again and snarling at the social worker. And he actually ended up starting to speak in another voice again and said, "It's time to die. I'm going to kill you," while looking straight into her eyes. And then he ended up saying the same thing, but to his brother as well. So then afterwards, when they were interrogating or questioning the older brother, I don't know if there was some like transfer between the little brother and the older brother, or maybe it was two separate evil entities, but then the older brother started to change as well. He started to get an evil, ugly looking face on, and he started growling and snarling as well. And then he started to tell his grandmother the same thing, "I'm going to kill you." And he launched himself at his grandmother, wanting to choke her. And they ended up pulling him off as well. But then he did something that no one was expecting. So keep in mind that the social worker, the grandmother, and a nurse and the brother was all present in the room. So there were multiple witnesses. It wasn't just the family in the situation. He supposedly ran up the wall Matrix style while holding his grandmother's hand at the same time, like next level parkour, and managed to go up onto the ceiling. It was crawling on the ceiling as well, snarling like an evil animal. What's even worse is that none of them remember anything that happened. They don't remember anything. And obviously, because there were other people besides the family present, this story went viral. It was on several news channels all over the United States and in Indiana as well, because the nurse and the caseworker were there. Like, this is just something that is bizarre. Like, I'm a nurse and I have seen very strange things, but I have never seen someone walk up a wall. Because of all of these things happening, for some reason, the medical professionals still thought that there was some type of mental illness at hand here. So they ended up escalating the situation and decided to separate LaToya from her children to further evaluate them and see if they could find some type of medical cause. But even despite this, they actually ended up calling in the reverend that LaToya had gone to before. And somehow they all ended up deciding that they wanted to do an exorcism on the youngest boy, or maybe the medical professionals had suggested to him. I'm not sure. That part is a little hazy. The reverend, like any other member of a religious community, they have to be able to find evidence to do these exorcisms, because they can't just go, "Okay, I'm gonna exorcise you now. Hold up." So obviously the reverend said, "I'm gonna go talk to them and I'm gonna interview them to try and roll out some things." So he ended up deciding to meet LaToya, Rosa, and the kids at their family home. I know. You see where this is going. So he went to their home, met them there, and when he got there, some bizarre things started happening. Like, the first thing that he noticed was that whenever he would enter a room, lights would start to flicker. So he noticed that. That was a little weird. He also heard strange noises, noticed some strange behavior by the families. But then LaToya actually ended up complaining of a headache. And again, she was acting a little bizarre, just not herself. Like, he would have been speaking to her before and she was fine, like a decent human being, and then the next moment she was being weird. So then he decided to analyze her a little bit further, and he ended up putting a crucifix on her forehead, and then she started to convulse. Obviously, this is not a good sign. So the reverend actually ended up saying, "Okay, there's something evil going on here," and then he decided to pursue this investigation further. So despite the Reverend's examinations and his conclusions, the medical professionals still ended up going on about with their end of the investigation because they were so adamant about there being some type of mental health issues going on here, with LaToya being the instigator and influencing her children to the point that they were becoming delusional as well or losing sight of reality. So with the investigation, they actually ended up finding out that the kids were missing a lot of school, like a lot of school. And LaToya ended up telling them that it was because the kids were just so sick. They felt so run down, exhausted, and tired, not only from the dark energy that was in the home, but by the experiences that they were having, the noises, the apparitions, the demonic possession. So the kids didn't want to go to school, and of course she didn't force them. But the bizarre thing is that whenever the medical professionals would speak to them and try to figure out more information from them, they were completely coherent. They were completely fine, alert and oriented, but except for whenever it came up to the topic of demons. That's when they completely changed and would not make sense anymore. So despite all of this, because they couldn't get anything really conclusive about it all, they ended up deciding that they would let the social services take control, and they would end up making goals for the family to end up being reunited again, since again, they couldn't come to anything conclusive. So these goals included for LaToya to get a new job and a new home so that they could eventually all be reunited again. And with all of this too, the social workers would continue to investigate the home to see what was actually going on, what was causing all of this bizarre, erratic behavior. So during this investigation of the home, a lot of stuff happened. But to start off, there were a lot of people in there. So there was LaToya, her family, Rosa, there was the Reverend, the police chief, 2 police officers, and a police dog, and the family case manager. So they ended up first wanting to check out the basement because I guess they just wanted to start from the bottom up, and also because the family ended up saying that that's where a lot of the activity happens. So they go down to the basement to investigate. They bring the police dog down, and the police dog would stare at behind the stairs, and it would growl, and it would not let its eyes go from it. So they let him go and sniff, and they ended up actually finding bizarre things. So behind the stairs, they actually found just dirt or sand, not like a regular basement where you would find cement, right? It was as if they had left that area untouched on purpose. And as the dog was sniffing throughout, they actually ended up finding some items that were in there. So they dug it up, and then they ended up finding a candy wrapper, a pink fingernail, white underwear, a shirt pin, and some socks, and a small metal object. And they actually ended up concluding that it seemed like that area was almost used for some sort of ritual. Like, why would there be dirt? Why would there be someone's personal items there? Like, I don't know. It's very bizarre. I shouldn't say concluding, they were suspecting that that is where they would end up doing the rituals. And they ended up blessing that area with salt. While this was going on downstairs in the basement, the social worker was upstairs on the main floor, just looking around, doing her investigation as usual. And then she said she started to feel some weird pain on her hand, but specifically on her pinky finger. She said that it felt like it was slowly breaking or something. And then she started to feel ill and nauseous. So she said that she wanted to step out of the house because she just felt like she needed some air. So she left the house to go get her fresh air, and LaToya ended up following her to kind of comfort her and console her to find out what was happening. But at that same time, LaToya said that she felt a severe headache go on. So while the 2 women were outside, the Reverend and the other police officers were still inside. And they were in one of the bedrooms, and they actually ended up seeing along the drapes oil just dripping down. Where did this oil come from? Like, it wasn't, when you're taking a shower or something and there's like a lot of steam built up and you see like dripping and stuff on blinds and on the walls. No, it wasn't dried up like that. Like, this was fresh oil, as if someone had taken, those batter thingies, whatever they're called, and just spread it all over the drapes. So they cleaned it. They thought it was bizarre, but they cleaned up. And then they left that room. But then they went back and the oil was right back there as if nothing had ever happened. They looked around everywhere and they couldn't figure out where this oil was coming from. And the Reverend actually said, okay, this is a sign of demonic activity. So this moves on to the priest finally deciding to do not an exorcism, unfortunately, because again, like I was saying before, it requires so much evidence, so much ruling out to be able to do it, and it requires permission from the archdiocese. So instead of this, the or the reverend, I should say, decided to do an intense blessing. So what makes this story and this house so creepy is the fact that anyone who steps into this home experiences very bad things afterwards. Whether it's just coincidental or bad luck, I don't know, but it happens within a very short period of time after that individual stepped into the house. So for example, Samantha, who was the social worker, she actually had a series of horrible things happen to her within 30 days after she was in the home. She was in a motorcycle accident and she had third-degree burns from that accident. She also ended up breaking 3 of her ribs while she was jet skiing, and she broke her hand and then broke her ankle on other separate occasions as well. And again, keep in mind, how does all of this happen within 30 days? So with all of these things happening and more evidence coming out that bad circumstances were occurring to individuals after they had left the home, the Reverend actually had enough information to get approval for an exorcism. So he ended up getting an approval for a series of 3 exorcisms to occur for LaToya and the home in 2012. During the first and second exorcisms, LaToya actually said that she felt a very, very intense pain, very similar to childbirth. And they couldn't really explain what was causing that. But on the Reverend's side, he said that throughout the time of the exorcism, LaToya was actually violently convulsing. So whether it was like the entire shaking of it, I don't know, but that was her description of the pain that she felt. So after all of the extreme convulsing, of course, with that, it drains your energy. So LaToya ended up passing out. But thankfully, the Reverend and those around ended up feeling like things had weakened a little bit, like the forces of the demons had subsided a tiny bit. So after the third exorcism, things finally ceased. The terror stopped, and this was nearing the end of 2012. And 6 months after her and her children were separated, she ended up getting custody of them again, and they were reunited. So the aftermath, what happened? So again, because this drew a lot of media attention, people ended up going to ask the landlord what he thought about the situation. But funny enough, he actually said that he had never heard of any complaints about this before LaToya, neither with LaToya being there and afterwards. But as he started to gain more information, he started to not be as much of a skeptic because he ended up finding out that the church actually had to get involved. And if a church were to get involved, you know that something's going on, right? A church wouldn't go along with some type of hoax. So again, as I was saying at the beginning of this episode, Zak Bagans, or Bagans, however you pronounce it, the very famous paranormal investigator, he was so intrigued by all of the reports coming out from this story that he's crazy. He bought the house so that he can investigate it personally. And again, this movie, it's called Demon House. I think you should watch it. It explains everything very, very well. And it even shows what happens to Zak and his crew members when they're in the house and even after they leave the house. And it's very bizarre. Like, a lot of people say that it could have been played off, but what intrigued me was the feelings that I got when I was watching. I don't know, I can't explain it. It was just bizarre. And the fact that there were so many people involved, There were just so many factors taking place, and it all ended up leading to this one house. I don't know. It's creepy. But tell me what you guys think. And thank you for watching today's episode. Very intriguing, very creepy. If you liked it, let us know in the comments below and suggest anything else that you'd like for us to talk about. Comment, like, subscribe, and see you later. Bye.